Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
For all of the criticism that they've taken in the last 2 years, the Republican majority in North Carolina has certainly done this one good turn for education. They brought it squarely back as the central debate. Welcome again to the most widely watched source for business and public policy in the Carolinas. I'm Chris William, and thank you for watching. And it's not just the Tar Heel state that has moved the dialogue of education reform front and center, but serious effort and movement is afoot in South Carolina. And it may be even further along and in more harmony than their northern cousins. On this special two-part CBR, business and industry are bringing to bear big money and wielding serious political clout in an effort to improve education readiness and global competitiveness. We hope you'll stay with us. We start in just a moment.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded February 28, 2014. On this week's program, Mike Brenan of BB&T, Pamela Lackey from AT&T, Walter McDowell with Best NC, and Anna Nelson from Spangler Companies. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome again to our program. Gentlemen, ladies, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Pamela, I'm going to start with you. You know, we talk so much, programs like this, at cocktail parties, at conferences about this issue of education, and I find it ironic that here in the most powerful and rich country in the world that we are, and I'm hesitant to say this, but middling in our education at best, and that we have such an acute and acerbic debate around it when it's clear that we all want the same thing. Why is that in this country?
Well, Mike, you know, I think really probably I can get to that a little bit because of what Mike and I work with. The group that Mike and I are co-chairing is called Transform South Carolina. If we transform education, we will transform South Carolina and its economic future. And the reason we call it Transform South Carolina, not Reform South Carolina education.
And there was some debate about that.
There was a lot of debate about that. The reason we went with Transform South Carolina is because we've come to the conclusion after a lot of study and talking to a lot of people that the system of education we have in place today works perfectly well for what it was designed for 130 years ago, and that was a manufacturing and agrarian economy. Today's economy is not that at all. And so if we're going to make improvement in education and in our results from education and have workers prepared for the future, then we must transform the model that we're using into a whole different model that will suit today's economy and today's jobs.
You know, so Anna, are we talking about pulling levers to change the economy, or are we talking about changing culture?
I think you're talking about both. And to the point about why is there so much debate, not surprisingly, people have a lot of passion around education. It's very personal to them. They went to school, their parents went to school, their children went to school, and they have a very personal relationship with it and have developed strong opinions about it. But we are looking to raise student achievement. In our own state, we have graduation rates that are somewhere around 75%. And this is, believe it or not, better than the United States averages. Actually, the United States average is around 75%, the North Carolina average is around 80%. So we are doing more in North Carolina with fewer resources because, as is widely known, the resources we give to public education in our state are near the bottom of the country.
So Mike, Walter, please jump in here. We're talking about changing, you're talking about reform, and as broad and as deep as this issue is, this is really changing the DNA of how we think and how we apply this. Is that right? Is that going out on a limb?
Yes. Best is 65 business leaders in North Carolina.
This is Best NC?
Best NC is 65 business leaders in North Carolina, and we believe it's time to transform education. And the call to action for us is that our companies have thousands of jobs and not enough qualified applicants. So we have job opportunities in North Carolina, and we don't have children who have been prepared academically for those jobs. So it's time to transform.
So the term that's knocked around the most is skills gap. Is that accurate, Mike? We've heard Walter say, is this a skills gap? It's certainly one dimension, but expand on that a little bit.
I know Pam and we've heard that loud and clear from business and industry in South Carolina that there is a skills gap. And it's not so much all the time on the academic side or the technical side, because most of our businesses and industry in South Carolina are going to train their associates how to do the technical kinds of things. We're discovering that they want students who know how to collaborate and work on teams and work on projects and who understand what it means to be innovative and creative, and even for some companies, just to show up to work on time.
So when help me here. So you're really having to go all the way back to pre-K to get this right.
Well, let me share one more thing that I think is what we've discovered in South Carolina. In the past, what we've done is we've tinkered with the old system of learning, pretty much from the top down. Either the governor's got an initiative or somebody in the General Assembly has an initiative. And I think what we've concluded that if we're truly going to transform it, we've got to start from the bottom up.
From the grassroots.
And that's why Pam and I worked so hard to build a coalition of all the various groups who are interested in public education: business, industry, Administrators Association, School Boards Association, Teachers Associations, parent organizations, and even students. So we've got everybody at the table that we think has a real vested interest in this. But we believe that real transformation is going to occur when it happens from the bottom up, and that's where we've started our initiative. Right.
Does that end up being more work? Does that end up more work than you thought?
Oh, absolutely. And what's exciting though about it is it's certainly more work because everybody's at the table. And I've been in education. I worked in education before I went to work for AT&T for many years. And this is the first time in my career, and I've heard several people say this in my lifetime, that everybody's at the table and everybody agrees in South Carolina that we've got to address this issue. Having all those various people there certainly means that everybody has their own perception. Their own, as Anna said earlier, everybody's got a personal experience with education, and so they have their own points of view. But we found that the folks that we're working with in South Carolina are clearly focused on the need to do it differently, to do education differently at the classroom level. It's not just, as Mike said, it's not a top-down level. It's not we've said many times, the worst thing that could happen in South Carolina is if a General Assembly member were to introduce a bill or the governor to introduce a bill called the Transform Education Act of 2014. That would be the end of the effort because it's not going to work if we do it top-down. We did a poll, one example, we did a poll last spring as part of Transform SC of parents across the state. And 78% of the parents in South Carolina said we've got to completely, like their school, but that we've got to rethink public education in order to improve it.
Do you think, and I'll stay with you just a second here, Pamela, and I want to ask you about Project Lift and how broad that became. You talk about having to do more work than you expected, but Pamela, is this one of those issues where, I don't like Congress, but my congressperson's okay. Is this how it works in schools? I don't like the system, but my school seems to be working.
Well, what this poll showed, Mike, was that the parents do like, they like their child's school from an emotional standpoint, but that they also recognize that that the schooling that their children were getting was not going to prepare them for the jobs that they already see in the workplace. They know that they don't sit in rows and have their manager stand in front of them and tell them exactly what to do each day, and then they have to go do it in that manner and bring it back. They realize that in their own workplace, they sit around with colleagues and they access information via the technology. They bring resources to the table to solve a problem, a real world problem, and then they have to communicate what the solution to that problem should be. And what they don't see is their child's school necessarily preparing them to be able to step into that type of job. And as importantly is many parents also know their job changes frequently. In my industry, things change dramatically every 2 or 3 years in the technology and telecommunications industry, and so people have to retrain themselves. And so they also understand that we've got to make sure that children know how to learn in the long term. South Carolina businesses have said, prospects and businesses that are there, that they're looking for a highly qualified, stable, highly educated workforce that can retrain itself over and over again.
So, okay, Pamela, so when we bring that kind of, not full circle, but when we bring it back down to the genesis of education, and I think this is fair to say, Anna, Project Lift, of which you were certainly on the point of the spear with, Project Lift is probably one of the most well-funded, well thought out, and I'm not saying it here because you're sitting 2 feet from me, but it seems like it's one of the most well thought out initiatives. But even doing that, I have to wonder aloud, how much did you not know now that you didn't know before? I mean, how much are you learning how ignorant that we all really are about how widespread this issue is?
Well, what we knew several years ago when we first looked at the issue was that we had high schools that were at 50% graduation rates. And we had several of those in our midst, and that's not unique to Charlotte. That's across the country. So that was just a bald fact that we knew was not economically sustainable for our local economy or state or national economy. You cannot afford to have 50% of your human resources go to waste.
Right.
And in this day and time, having someone not graduate from high school is not only a personal catastrophe, but it is an economic catastrophe for our communities. So we said, what can we do about that? We brought lots of businesses and philanthropies to the table to study it for a year, and we learned a lot in that year. And what we learned that we then put into a plan over the course of the next year where we raised the dollars. It happened to be $55 million that we raised of private dollars. And we entered into a public-private partnership with the school system. And we are looking at the corridor of schools that is at the most risk in our community with the highest poverty and the lowest achievement rates. And as we've gone about the work, we continue to learn more. And we realize the work is harder than we ever thought it could be. We have increased appreciation for the principals. We have increased appreciation for the teachers when you learn how difficult their job is. And of course, we're focused on the achievement gap. And to be sure, there are many schools in our midst that are achieving at the top of the charts. They are excellent. Nothing much needs to be reformed about them or changed about them.
So they're not in the LIFT experiment.
They're not in the LIFT experiment, but we should be careful when we talk about schools that there are different schools with different capabilities, and that we should not be criticizing in any way some of these schools that are already at the top of the charts. They are at the top of the charts internationally, schools that are not far from here. And yet there are schools also not far from here that are performing at the bottom of the charts. And those are the schools that Project Lift is focused on.
I want to ask you, is Project Lift scalable? Could you?
That was the basic promise and premise of Project Lift, was that after 5 years we would take the lessons learned and apply them more broadly across the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and if feasible, more broadly across the state. And as such, the leadership in Raleigh is keeping close communication with us about what is working and what is not. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is obviously in day-to-day partnership with us, and they are already working to roll out some of our successes. They're not waiting until year 5. They're taking some of our learnings and applying them immediately.
You know, Walter, I want to ask you, coming off of that, is business and industry really prepared to peel back all the layers of the onion and find the ugly truth, whatever they may be? I don't know how else to call it that, but you think business and industry has the capacity to say, this is a much bigger job than we thought, but that's okay. We're all in and we're going to get to it. And how do you articulate what that sense is?
We are, the businesses in North Carolina, particularly the 65 companies that have joined our best effort, do believe that now is the time. Success in public education is a shared responsibility. It's the parent and the student and the teacher and the community and the business all working together to transform public education. The heavy lifting has to be done because the vitality of our economy and the vitality of our company depends on getting it right in public education. I want to add a little wrinkle here is that education begins at birth. And perhaps one of the great failings in this country and other countries is our children, what happens to children during the first 2,000 days of their lives? Because all the research would indicate that that's going to determine whether they are successful academically or not. So we are preoccupied with
Direct benefit? Is it a direct kind of cause effect?
Absolutely. Absolutely is. Who is this child? Who are their parents? What's going on in the home? Are there books in the home? Is the child being spoken to? But the development that the child experiences during the first 2,000 days will predict whether they are successful academically or not. So we are preoccupied with K through 12 or community colleges. What we really need to add to the equation is what's going on in the first 2,000 days, and what does the community need to do to support those parents and those children so that when they come to kindergarten, they're ready to learn.
The research, I'm sorry.
Walter couldn't be more on target, because one of the learnings we had is that the children who came into the most at-risk schools, the most at-risk population, was already 2 years behind by the time they crossed the door of their first day of kindergarten, if they had not had quality early child experience. So it's almost impossible for them to ever catch up.
So, go ahead.
I was going to add the research we've seen.
That's right.
And we do have a birth to pre-K initiative in South Carolina as part of New Carolina too. Mike and I work with the K-12 group, initiative, Transform SC. But the research we've been shown is that they do get so far behind if they don't have that quality experience, particularly in language development, being read to, et cetera, and talked with, that it can be overcome, but it's so expensive to overcome that you're much better off from an economic standpoint if you address it early and first.
Chris, you may be aware of this, but Anita Zucker in Charleston, the CEO of Intertech, is working on an initiative in Charleston called Cradle to Career. Which is just to get at what you just addressed, Walter. And I don't know how well you know Anita, but if Anita's going to do something, it's going to be done right, and she's going to stick with it until the task is done. And that's encouraging to see that kind of work going on also.
Well, she's been on this program talking around that issue, but not directly to it. So this is really compelling. So you've got, so you've got business and industry, and you've got some policy leaders, and identifying this whole issue of even, the first 2,000 days, as you said, Walter. But my question is, how do you impose, just say it this way, how do you tell people how to parent? Because that's what it comes down to. And let me say it under this circumstance. We had Nurse Family Partnership on this program talking about these issues, and they struggle with that, and their sole focus is to get first-time mothers doing a lot of the right things to head a lot of these off. So is this a co-initiative with programs like that? How do you do that?
Can I address it?
Why don't you both
Pam.
address it? Go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say that if we improve the system of education overall, and students and children are achieving at higher levels within that system of education and see more relevancy to their own personal lives and their own personal passions in the education that they receive, let's say in the K-12 system, then we'll find that more people, more parents, more mothers and fathers who may not have that ability to address their child will be able to do that, because and oftentimes what you're talking about are the parents of these children are the parents who dropped out of school, who did not get a good education, did not see relevance of that education to their own lives and how it was going to help them achieve a better life, be successful in their career and as a parent and a citizen. So all of these things, yes, it's very complicated, and it's also much more challenging than we all, probably wanted it to be when we started on this effort. But it's essential for us to address all these issues, because as we improve each part of the system, then those very same people that we're talking about helping now in a one-on-one with those parents will be more successful, because their educational experience will have been more successful.
Walter, go ahead.
Chris, as you know, I live in Winston-Salem, and we launched a Cradle to Career initiative in Winston-Salem about a year ago. And we're doing the nurse-family partnership. So a nurse is knocking on the door of an expectant mother saying, "We understand you're expecting a child. May we help you? And it's free. We will transport you to the clinic. We will make sure that you are properly fed. We will help you have a healthy baby, and then we will stay with you 6 months after birth." All you can do is offer. But what we found is most of those mothers say, "Please come help me. I want to do the best for my child." One other thing we're experimenting in Winston-Salem is the Winston-Salem Foundation has funded a family engagement program, and they pay for school social workers to visit in the home of every kindergarten child to see if they can encourage that parent to become involved when their child enters kindergarten. So I think there's so many things, Project Lift, there's so many things the community can do to help our educators deliver better outcomes.
Mike, we have about 2 minutes left. Believe it or not, it goes that by when you really start digging into things. So as we find out more and more about what needs to be done and the pathways and the connections, do you think business and this is a question I asked before, do you think business has the certainly the capacity, but do they have the appetite as they find out that this is a tougher thing that maybe even they thought?
I think they're starting to get that, Chris.
Are they shying away from it?
No, not at all, because, in their own businesses, they're talking about sustainability. And this is a sustainability issue, quite frankly. And the other thing we're all starting to recognize is this is going to take a long time. It may take a generation to transform education in North and South
Will
Carolina.
it put us farther behind other countries?
Not necessarily. It may for a season, it may for a short period of time, but I think over the long haul, I think if we do this and do it right, I think it'll again make us leaders in the world and not followers.
It goes back to what I think it goes back to what we started talking about, is everybody across the country has the same system of education. It was designed, as we said, 130 years ago, and it's not a model that's sustainable for the future. It was designed for the bell curve, 50% of the students to graduate, 50% to not graduate. And we had jobs for those 50% in manufacturing and agriculture. Today, we don't have jobs for that. We only have jobs for about 10% of people in that type of job, an unskilled job. And so for our economic success, we've got to change the model so that 90%, as you said your goal was at Project Lift, 90% are graduating at a high level, with a own grade level set of skills.
Do you see, in about 30 seconds left, Anna, do you see the outcomes you'd like to see, the outcomes in where you are with the program?
We are optimistic because we're seeing strong early indications of progress, but to your point, it will take years, and that's why we've given ourselves at least 5 years to measure ourselves, but we are seeing reduced absenteeism, reduced incidents of behavior, and we saw a 15% increase in graduation rates in the first year. So we were very encouraged.
Encouraging. And we'll leave it on that. That's probably a good place to leave it. We're going to continue part 2 next week on this program, just scratching the surface on education in the Carolinas. Join us again next week. If you have any comments or suggestions, go to carolinabusinessreview.org. Watch the program, make comments. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Thank you. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.